Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carbary. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. This episode is sponsored by Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. Today, we are joined by Todd Palmer. Todd is the CEO of Extraordinary Advisors. He's also the author of The Job Search Process. Todd, welcome to the show.
Jonathan, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We're thrilled to connect with you. And, Todd, we're actually going to be talking today about this idea of why you should focus on margin and not revenue. And I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it's going to be tremendous content for our listeners. But before we get into that, I also did want to mention you are a sort of 6 times, you and your company, 6 times on the Inc. 5000 list. And I think that's going to be actually part of today what we're talking about. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and everything that you and your team at Extraordinary Advisors are up to these days.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning that. That's one of the nicest things we've ever been able to accomplish as a group. That company, Diversified Industrial Staffing, is a 6-time Inc. 5000 company. And the Inc. 5000 measurable is fast growth companies tied to revenue. And what we realized before we even made that list is we needed to pivot to have strong revenue is a great thing. It's nice to get the award, but more importantly, you got to make money doing it because you can literally grow yourself out of business by putting out so much revenue at lower margins that the cash flow and the profitability of the organization end up becoming incredibly diluted. What we chose to do for the recruiting company is we were very focused at one point on being an all things to all people company. First decision we made to get away from that is what niche do we want to focus on? We found a niche where there was an increased demand and a diminished supply. What customers told us is they would pay us a higher margin if we could fill that gap in where there was an increased demand and a diminished supply. And that happened to be in the skilled trade sector for manufacturing, for machinists and welders, people like that. And it allowed us to then go and really grow the business in a profitable way because in the culture of the company became about the margin. And we would turn down bad deals that were maybe looked really strong on the revenue side, but they really didn't drop any money to the bottom line because I'm assuming you have some people today who are entrepreneurs and they're working for themselves, they're building companies, but they really should get paid for what they do. And you can't pay yourself if the margins aren't there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And I love the fact that, this is a very personal experience for you and the businesses that you've led. So you obviously know what you're talking about, this idea, again, focusing on margin and not necessarily revenue. Now, I know for your process, I mean, it kind of, it may start with this conversation about where are you, where do you want to go, and how do you get there? This is all tied to the idea of margin. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, and that's what we do at Extraordinary Advisors when we take on a new client engagement. That's some of the first questions we ask them is, where are you currently at? What's your planning process? What are your margins? What's your financial overview? What is your human capital review? We go through all those pieces so that we can really help the entrepreneur or the leadership team make more money because that's really why they're in business. Because if they make more money, they're able to be more profitable. They can share more with their teams. They can share more with their families. I certainly don't subscribe that you should work yourself to death. I almost did that and it almost cost me my business. So I don't subscribe to that. But if you are going to work an hour in the day, make it a very profitable hour. Focus on where can you get more margin. Is it adjusting a percentage to a point on your pricing? Is it taking a look at your cost structure? And is there anything you can do, go back and get some discounts from vendors? What about your turn on cash? When I know, for example, one of the biggest areas we increased our margins at Diversified Industrial was our payment terms to our clients at one point were 90 days. We got those payment terms down to 14 days, and that save on cash and that attractiveness to a financial institution was huge in improving our margins as well as our turn on cash. So there's just a lot of different levers an entrepreneur can pull.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's a great starting off point where you're kind of, you're mapping out your route to success with this focus on margin. Now, I know one of the things you had mentioned is growing yourself out of business when you are and talking about this idea of turning down deals that, it looks like it's going to be great revenue. It's not going to be great margin. Are there things that you look out for? Are there ways in which you advise other business owners to sort of to be aware of this, or things that they should look for? How do they prevent themselves from growing themselves out of business?
For sure. And I think that the real measurable has to be, what is your industry standard number? Every industry's got it. If you don't know it, find an association that can tell it to you, talk to professionals, find out those data points. So if you're in the tech space and the typical margin's 75%, well, then you're in a good spot. If you're in the staffing business like we are, sometimes that margin is razor thin. It's single digits. We're in the pennies business, not in the dollars business. So every penny saved can then equal a whole lot bigger impact than maybe it would be for other companies. A lot of younger entrepreneurs have to sometimes go through this growing process that companies will hire them to use them in a way that isn't in their best interest. And what I mean by that is, I've had many CPAs over the course of my 25 years in the staffing space say they love working with staffing companies. Why? Because they're an interest-free line of credit. And I say, well, tell me more about that. And they'll say, well, if I can get someone to give me my clients 90-day payment terms, we're going to float payroll for 100 employees for a whole quarter. And then what they're able to do is they're able to do different things with their cash. And what the staffing company doesn't realize is we're essentially being duped, because all they take a look at is some of their cost of goods sold, and they don't take into account the float on cash and how that's really a cost of goods sold if you're going to be doing those things for your clients. And they'll say, well, we're just going to leave and go to a different firm. We're going to take the business away. And the owner of the staffing company say, well, I'm losing a $3 million client. Well, really, in that $3 million client, what are you making to the bottom line? And if you do a real tight fiscal analysis to that, for $3 million in billing, I'm making $75,000. That's the risk reward is way out of whack.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just being very critical and intentional about taking a look at the larger picture. So, I love that.
Entrepreneurs have this weird misunderstanding, because they see big companies do what they call loss leaders. Entrepreneurs don't have that ability and that cash, those cash reserves typically, to do a loss leader. So I always caution the clients that we work with, watch out for the big gorilla in the room trying to convince you to take a loss leader, because all they're really doing is trying to put you out of business.
Good. That's great advice.
All right, today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing, and we'll be shining the spotlight on Aegis Software, a company that makes software for manufacturing operations. Aegis was one of the first companies in their space to invest in search marketing, but as competition grew, their performance plateaued. To counter this, they hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. With unparalleled experience in inbound lead gen for B2B companies, Directive was able to increase Aegis's monthly online leads by 457%, while at the same time lowering their cost per lead by 147%. Now, I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
And so, if you're on the lookout for growing yourself out of business, you've kind of tried your best to think critically, to map yourself to success by thinking, okay, I have to focus on margin, not revenue. Do you have a couple of pieces of advice for our listeners then, if they're thinking to themselves, okay, well, how do I focus on margin? Are there some tips and tricks of the trade, things that you think people can benefit from if they're thinking about some of these strategies?
For sure. I think the entrepreneur needs to take a look at themselves and what are their strengths. A lot of entrepreneurs that I know are really good at sales, or a lot of the other entrepreneurs I run to are really good at operations or working with the people and the deliverable of their service or their product. What a lot of entrepreneurs are not good at is understanding the financial documents of having a company. They don't understand the P&L. They don't even understand if the P&L they have is crafted correctly for their industry. They can't read a balance sheet. They don't know how to forecast a cash flow analysis. Those three documents, the P&L, the balance sheet, and the cash flow, are critical to any business, no matter what you're in. If you want to avoid growing out of business, you've got to know what your cash flow is going to look like. Can you project that? You may have great margins, but if your payment terms are extended, you've got to manage for that. I know one staffing company that we've worked with out in California has a really unique model, and they get paid 90 days out, but they have guarantee pay, which is a good thing. But they have to manage their cash flow so tightly during those 90 days that they have real highs and real lows, but then they've now created a financial model that fits what they do, so they can forecast what it's going to look like on the horizon for payables, receivables, and internal payroll, as well as external payroll. So there's, again, you want to know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's really incumbent upon the entrepreneur to get financial literacy. Where can they get that? They certainly can come to a coach. They can go to a CPA for some of those things. They can talk to industry peers if they're a part of a networking group like an EO or a YPO. At the end of the day, though, a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize what they don't know. And what they don't know typically ties around the finances.
Yeah. All right. Well, Todd, obviously this is just your area of expertise, and you've seen incredible success with Extraordinary Advisors, with the businesses that you've obviously led to the Inc. 5000 list, which is an incredible accomplishment. And this is one question we've actually been talking to our guests about: the ones that have a vision, the ones that are building towards something, the ones that are CEOs or thought leaders. And we've been getting some great answers. I'd love to ask you then, Todd, sort of at the end of the day, what kind of legacy are you hoping to leave behind? Whether that is, of course, personally, professionally, or even a combination of the two.
I think that, Jonathan, that's an awesome question. I wish more entrepreneurs pondered that. I started pondering that probably, 10 years ago. I'd met a young author. His name was Simon Sinek. He wrote a book called The Power of Why. And I actually brought him to Detroit a couple of times for some events. And he really helped me craft what my legacy is going to be. My legacy is 2 words. It's improve lives. In anything I do, in any endeavor I take on, I want to improve the lives of the people I've spent that time with. I used to have a definition of success, and that way, it had a lot of zeros behind the one at the front, boats and cars and houses and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, working with Sonic then pivoted me into redefining what my definition of success was. And for me, it's just been so powerful. And I steal it with complete authorship appreciation to Tony Robbins. And it's simple. My definition of success is doing what I want, when I want, as often as I want to do it, and with whomever I want to do it with. And sometimes that costs a decent amount of money, and sometimes that's free. But then I get to spend time with people that are important to me, doing really cool and unique things. And if I do enough of that, and I connect with enough people, whether it's through my coaching business or just socially with my friends, and I can improve those lives. And when my time comes to leave this earth, they throw a big party to celebrate the things I've been able to help folks understand or do, then it's been a life well lived.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it's a fantastic goal. It'll be a fantastic legacy. It feels like you are certainly well on your way to helping a lot of people. And I know that you've helped a lot of people in our audience. I mean, this has just been great content, and we really appreciate your expertise. Now, Todd, obviously, this idea is larger, bigger, more complicated, more complex than we could ever get into in the time that we have together. So if any of our listeners are interested in following up with you about today's topic, they want to connect with you, they want to find out more about Extraordinary Advisors, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Well, Jonathan, I think the best way for them to do it, I'd like to put this out to your listeners today, is if someone has gotten value from our conversation together and they think I can potentially, even just a half hour to 45-minute conversation, add value to their lives and improve their lives. So talking about their margins, talking about their people, talking about maybe what kind of legacy they want to live. I don't know. I'm happy to give an hour of my time to anybody who mentions that they heard me on your podcast today. They can book that through my website, extraordinaryadvisors.com. They can contact my booker. Her name is Kelly. And Kelly will get you introduced and added onto my calendar so that we can have a conversation that could potentially improve your lives. As really as a thank you to your group today, Jonathan, for having me on the program.
Well, definitely thank you for that. That's tremendous for you to offer that to our listeners. Again, we've been talking with Todd Palmer, Todd, thank you so much. It really was a pleasure having you on the show. Really looking forward to staying connected with you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.